And welcome back, footy fans. It's another episode of Donnie's Disposals, another AFL round review. Round four has come, it has gone, and it has left us all scratching our heads in so many ways with the interesting and quite puzzling in some situations results over the week. I am your host, Coach Donnie Hess, back here. And as we've kind of noticed again, Ross will not be with us all most of this year, but he will make an appearance on this episode here in a little bit. You'll see why just in a little bit. So, introducing my co-host for the round, my Hawks super fan from my supporter series this off season, Mr. Tim Newman. Tim, how are you doing, sir?
Yeah, not too bad. Thanks, Donnie. Thanks very much for having me on. It would be nice to come on after a Hawthorn win, but alas, it didn't happen.
Sadly, it didn't. But unfortunately, as we were kind of talking off mic, we were having some discussions on what we've kind of thought about Hawthorn and Sydney a little bit, which I think we both we're commiserating, unfortunately, after this round, as neither of our teams came out with the chocolates or the 4 points. But you know what? Footy goes on. Another round of footy is getting ready as we get ready for gather round this round. I'm fascinated to see how this goes. But before we go to that, let's review this one real quick, Tim. Just kind of a synopsis. Round four. What'd you think? Because I'm still scratching my head and flummoxed at how this season just does not seem to be going the way I thought when I did my preseason tips.
Yeah, some really interesting results. It was obviously the Lions on Thursday night to kick off, beating the Pies. They showed a bit of a blueprint as to how to get it done. And then, teams that I guess we thought might be up towards the top of the ladder, like Fremantle, who did really well last year, seem to be off the boil. And then you got teams like St Kilda, who at the moment, some of their squad looks like park footballers in terms of the names that they're throwing out each and every week. Just seem to be getting the job done. And then we go to Saturday night between the Power and obviously your team, the Swans, and the way that game unfolded at the end. You had Essendon 33 shots on goal, almost blew it by kicking 22 behinds. And then yesterday, Hawthorn being up over the reigning premiers at half time before Geelong flicked the switch and maybe have reignited their premiership defence.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to see. Let's go through each game kind of one by one and kind of discuss this because as you kind of said, Thursday night, the most result that I think I kind of didn't shock me, but it did surprise me a little bit more of the margin as the Brisbane Lions beat the Collingwood Magpies 116-83 again. The Brisbane Lions and the GABA are a completely different animal. And again, no pun intended on that one. But it's just like they get into the GABA and all of a sudden they become almost like their triple premiership team. They become almost unbeatable. It's crazy to think. But for the Pies team to come up there with so much positive momentum, they've been playing so well. I mean, there were people already, getting tattoos of the their premierships because they were going so well in the first three rounds. And I agree with what you said there. And as we had kind of set off, Mike, I think the blueprint of maybe how to kind of attack this Collingwood kind of typhoon, shall we say, of just forward pressure of forward, forward, forward was exactly what Brisbane did. And it was fascinating to watch and a huge step up by Will Ashcroft and to see Danaher, Hipwood, Cameron all have great games up front for the Lions.
Yeah, chuck in Rayner as well. I
Hmm.
think he kicked four on the night. He'd been moved from half back where he'd played the first three games into that forward line. I think other thing we have to take into consideration is that the Lions used Oscar McInerney the best way they could because Collingwood didn't have a known ruckman. Dan McStay was rucking. They had Ash Johnson as well. So Oscar was able to use his height, which meant all of a sudden Collingwood didn't have that presence in the midfield through a Darcy Cameron or a Mason Cox as we'd seen. And then the other thing that I found really fascinating is Collingwood actually had more shots on goal.
Hmm.
So it was 28 to 26. So if Collingwood had kicked straighter, who knows? It might have been a bit closer towards the end.
Yeah, I kind of noticed that in the previous game against Richmond too, that I think Collingwood is a little errant on in front of goal. So if you can get shots on goal and you're accurate, I think you can make them pay sometimes for being so manic that sometimes they just take a lot of shots that are kind of low percentage, shall we say. So it'll be interesting again. Will Ashcroft, an amazing performance by that young man, showing why he is indeed the number one overall kid in this last draft. It was hard to argue that. And to see Dacos and Ashcroft go at it, that was fascinating to see the previous two ones, number one overall picks, both playing super, super well. Again, Dacos is absolutely ridiculous. The talk of Brownlow in his second season is picking up steam if he continues to have these type of performances. So we jump to the Good Friday match, and I loved seeing almost a sellout at Marvel Stadium between Carleton and North Melbourne. An absolute cracking game. Carleton get the chocolates, 107-84. But I got to say this Ruse team, after kind of a sketchy game against Hawthorn again, as a Hawthorn fan, I bet you kind of chuckle at that because there's your one win, your win for the season so far. But I love watching this Ruse team. They're scrappy, they're tough, and they made the Blues. They made the Blues had to earn this one. This isn't one of those where the Blues just kind of put it in second gear and went through it. I mean, and again, Harry Mackay, Charlie Curnow showing they are a two-headed monster that on their day can be deadly in front of goal as one of the reasons why they got this win.
I think what you just said was right. So those two big buggers for Carlton kicking 10 goals between them, as Clarko called them. Out of the 16 goals, they kicked 10. But you have to consider that the North Melbourne defence was missing Griffin Logue, who
Mm-hmm.
got a week for his bump on Will Day. And they were also missing Ben Mackay. And Ben Mackay and Harry Mackay have never actually been on the same park at the same time.
8 years. Yep.
You know, 8 years. There you go. So I think if you look at that, the Kangaroos incredibly plucky in terms of the way they played. Clarko has always been known for his ability to be able to sit there to work out what he can do in terms of moving magnets to give his team the best opportunity each week. And against the Blues, as you said, the Blues weren't in second gear. They had to fight and scrap the whole way before ending up winning by just under 4 goals. And I think that's a testament to Clarko as a coach to be able to use some of those unknown players, and I guess in terms of that undersized backline to be able to compete against the firepower that Carlton had.
Yeah, North is going to make you're going to have to earn your victories against North this year, which is kind of back to what they were a couple of years ago when you knew you were in for a fight when you played North Melbourne, which is great to see that Clarko has kind of made that impact on it. And again, seeing Griffin Logan, Ben Mackay coming back, it'll be fascinating to see how North Melbourne does the rest of the year. And again, Carlton, technically the other undefeated team, though they do have that draw with Richmond, they're also undefeated as well. It'll be fascinating to see can the Blues make up for what they didn't do last year and find themselves in the finals at the end of the year. We jump over to the Adelaide Oval where, as you kind of said in your thoughts, Fremantle continue to struggle as the trip over to the Adelaide Oval leads to a loss by 39 as the Adelaide Crows win 111-72. And it's fascinating to see the Crowies because at the start of the season, I was a little worried after a couple of the first few game results, but I think they're starting to find their mojo. And when Josh Rochelle and Saligo and some of these younger, talented Crows, even Isaac Rankin, if they get going, there's a lot of mojo in that Crows locker room. They could be a danger to maybe even sneak into the finals this year.
Youthful exuberance. It's a wonderful thing to have. Jordan Dawson, former Swans player,
Mm-hmm.
getting paid huge money to play as a halfback last year. And this season, they've thrown him into the midfield. And my goodness, doesn't he look fantastic going through there? You've got Tex Walker kicking 4 goals on the day as that experience up forward. And then, as you said, some of those younger guys, I think between Rankin, Rochelle, and Saligo, they kicked 8 of the goals, which, phenomenal effort, kicking almost half the team's goals between those three young guys. And, look on the other side, you've got Freo, who at the moment are playing like bastards. Jago O'Meara's gone over from obviously the Hawks, and he was going to add something to that midfield. I think Dave Mundy has been a massive loss in terms of his experience, but also his ability to find targets and just to get people going in the right direction.
I think a little bit too. I think a little bit too is a lot of teams are starting to kind of tag Brayshaw out of Fremantle, and the fact that I look at it, they lost a lot more than they really gained over the offseason. You lose Akers, you lose Logue, you lose Lob. Even though for me, I think Lob is an addition by subtraction. Honestly, that's again personal opinion there. But and then you bring in Jackson, who I think is he was great for the D's, but he was in a different role than I think he's being asked to do because he again, like at Melbourne, he's been asked to be the second fiddle to a very good ruckman in Sean Darcy, but he's not really a forward. He's not really a back. He's kind of that midfieldish rock. So I'm fascinated to see how they do it. I mean, they had the great performance against the West Coast Eagles, but then it was a West Coast Eagles that was a walking infirmary last week. So was it a little bit of fool's gold the last round against the Eagles? We'll have to see. But again, Fremantle, their woes continue because there's just holes in this Fremantle team that just were never really filled by some of the big losses. I think Akers is another one, is a huge loss on the wing for them because they really don't have somebody to go there. You've got Sarong, you've got Brayshaw, you've got those really good, but then you don't have that third kind of amigo and then the wings to really kind of balance this team out. So it'd be fascinating. I hope Fremantle get it figured out because it could be a long season out west if they don't get that figured out. And unfortunately, Longmuir's patience is probably going to be wearing thin with this group if this continues to happen on each weekend. So we'll jump back over to the MCG, a wet and soggy MCG, as the Doggies find a way to get another win over the Richmond Tigers by 5, 89-84. And the Doggies, I think a lot of us prematurely put them into outside the finals and a lost season after the first couple, but they've really roared. They've really come roaring back and beat a Tigers team that I don't know what is wrong. This is not the Tigers team of old. And I know this is not the Tigers team that 17 had all that manic pressure and you had guys like Butler and Higgins and Ellis. They've been picked apart because when you win, your players get picked off because lower teams want your players. So this isn't the same Richmond team, and their profile is in this purgatory because you've got older guys like Conchin and Rewalt and Martin, and then you've got these young kids like Gibkiss and Cumberland. It's they haven't really found a way to make these mesh as well as I think they could. So they're really this team that on its day sometimes can be absolutely great, and then on other days they can be a rabble. I'm not sure. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'd completely agree. I think if you go back and watch the game, their second quarter was absolutely scintillating. So I think they were down by 29 points at one stage late in the first, up by 14 at halftime. They piled on 7 goals straight. They looked fantastic. Uh, Through the wet weather, they were making the ball look like it was dry weather footy, and you thought, wow, like this could be a huge, huge win for the Tigers. And then after halftime, literally whatever was working in that second quarter just stopped, and it became the I guess the familiar faces again. Dusty putting his hand up and trying to drag the team along. Cochin, who interestingly enough was used as the sub,
Mhm.
looked like he'd been demoted, looked like he'd been dropped, and then put as the sub. And I think Tom Lynch for them was a huge loss because that presence that they had up forward, he was gone, which then meant you were left with Samson Ryan, who's played 5 games as a key forward, and Noah Cumberland, who I think's played under 20 games as your main forwards. Obviously, with Jack Rewalt being out for the weekend.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see how Richmond does this because unfortunately with Lynch's foot injury, he's going to be out at least a couple of months. So, I mean, Damian Hardwick's got his homework to do because he's got to figure out a way to kind of get back to the 2017 team who had Rewalt as your full forward, and then your kind of mosquito crew that caused your pressure. And have they gotten used to Lynch being up there so much that it's kind of thrown off their chemistry a little bit? So we'll have to see how he does that. And then Luke Beveridge, a tip of my cap. I mean, he's found a way to get a couple of wins. He's kind of gotten the discussion off of him and back onto how well that the Doggies can play on their day when they can get their run and gun style. I mean, Tim English, I think is really, if he can keep this up, stay healthy. I have a hard time seeing too many people being able to put their hand up above him for all Australian because he has been absolutely fantastic in the ruck for the Duggies. Bontempelli again, another one of those. Get on my back, gentlemen. I'm going to take you to the promised land, and he does it. Liberatore with another fantastic game as well in the middle. So, I mean, if this Duggies team shows up a lot more in this year, they're going to be in the finals hunt. But can they maintain it? is my biggest question on the doggies. So we'll jump over to the story of the season so far, and that is Ross Lyon and the St. Kilda Saints. They are 4-0. I repeat that, ladies and gentlemen, 4-0, and they have 15 guys on the injury list. I mean, before we even talk about this game, Tim, how mental is this? I think everybody went into the season going, Ross Lyon's going to structure this team. Can he play present day footy? I mean, he was known really good defensive. He's great structure wise. Can he play present day footy? He's let this run and gun roster that has been put together by the list manager for a previous coach, and he's found a way to get his structure in there, be good defensively, but play fast, quick, ball moving footy. How mental is this?
The one thing I've heard people talk about Ross Lyon, and they always say that when he comes into a team, the first thing he teaches is effort. And if you look at the way that St Kilda are playing, it's just effort personified. You know, you've got these young guys like Mitch Owens, who
Mhm.
in any other team would be probably playing VFL level, trying to get, some experience there before getting a shot. All of a sudden, he looks like one of those players that when Tim Membry comes back, or when you have King come back into the team, he won't be gone. He will be
Mhm.
staying. He'll be one of those ones that's made it incredibly hard. So I think all credit to Ross Lyon, because the effort that he's got those players playing with at the moment is absolutely massive, and a reason why the Saints are 4-0. And I think at this stage they can go 1 win, 1 loss for the rest of the season, and they'll make the eight.
I completely agree with you. So we'll look at it again. So they get the win over the Suns, and again, the Suns, a team that just infuriate me because with all that talent, with all that skill, and Stewie Doo is not a bad coach. I will say this till I'm blue in the face. He's a really good coach. There's just something amiss with some of these players, and I don't know how to fix it. So they get a 53-point win by the Saints, 113-60. And again, Jack Higgins again finds a way to kick another bag. He's playing absolutely, as you said, Mitch Owens again playing like an all Australian for only being like a 6 game player. What was it? The guy that they got off from a steakhouse was working as a waiter is playing a bite or somebody. He's playing well. It is by committee, and it's so much fun to watch. And knowing that this round they get Collingwood, I cannot wait. Cannot wait for gather round in this game because I think that is going to be an insanely good game. Because as you said, the effort that Ross Lane teaches and an all effort team and playing against a Collingwood team that intrigued us those first couple of rounds. Cannot wait for it. But the Suns, before we move on, the Suns, this is a team, like I said, infuriates me because I look at that list. You've got Rowell, you've got Tuke Miller, you've got Witz, you've got Noah Anderson, you've got Lukosius, you've got Joel Jeffries, you've got some super, super talent. But for some weird reason, it just is not a consistently working thing. How frustrating is this? And I hate asking this question, but I will, as somebody that supports a relatively more established club in Victoria. Is the Gold Coast experiment a failure?
Oh, absolutely. The Gold Coast failure is a massive. Sorry, the Gold Coast experience a massive failure. I think in terms of sporting teams or sporting organisations on the Gold Coast, I think there's been about 20 throughout the last sort of 30 years, and none of them are successful because in terms of the Gold Coast, it's a very transient place. People go there for a holiday. Almost be like putting a team in Las Vegas. You don't have that backing, that supporter group that's always there. And then you look at the caliber of players that they've had going through there. Gary Ablett, when he went up there, obviously Tom Lynch when he started, Dion Prestia, I think they were given so many concessions in terms of draft picks, and they had these high caliber players that are there and still do. I mean, you mentioned Matt Rowell, you mentioned Noah Anderson. You've got all these guys who, you know, are top echelon players, Tuke Miller as well. But yeah, they just can't seem to put it all together. And it's frustrating because you go back, a full week, and they'd knocked off the reigning premiers. They made
Mhm.
Geelong look second rate. And then they travel to Marvel Stadium. And I mean, Marvel Stadium is a bit of a grey site. If you speak to Damien Hardwick, he'll tell you no one likes to play at
Uh-huh.
Marvel. and no one likes it. And they showed up at Marvel Stadium, and I think Matt Rowell had 12 touches, which is unheard of because the week before it looked like an absolute world beater. So I think it's great that Stewie Jew had signed on for a contract extension, but this was the year they were meant to be making the eight, and if they don't, I reckon there could be some jungle drums beating in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you this, Tim. I bet you probably didn't see it, but in my preview season preview, I asked all the other guys, what was your bold prediction? My bold prediction was Gold Coast making the final, and I said it's something bold, it's something out there. I just had that feeling, and it's not materializing, unfortunately. I know it's 4 games in. There's a whole season to go, but I just I don't see the green shoots that I should expect from this type of team, unfortunately. So we'll jump from that discussion to the one I don't want to. I really don't want to, but I will. Port Adelaide go to the SCG, get the 2 point win in a game that I will be 100% honest. Let me just go here real quick, Tim. This was a scintillating finish, but this was less than an ideal footy game. The skill errors on both sides were atrocious at times. The kicks to the corridor or kicks to simple targets that were missed got really frustrating for me because I know Sydney's a really good kicking team. I think Port on its day when they want to can be a really good kicking team. So I was a little bit underwhelmed by this performance by both teams. Port Adelaide scrapped this one out. I really do. I really do think Sydney kind of lost this one, not because of the injuries. Like I'm not going to make the excuses because I think what Dane Rampy did on Charlie Dixon for the most part after both Patty McCartan went down and Tommy McCartan went down was heroic because he's super undersized, but he found a way to keep Charlie Dixon out of it. So when Kenny Hinkley moved Charlie into the rock a little bit more, that kind of changed the game because they were kind of high wide, and that kind of really helped, which opened up Jeremy Finlayson later in that game as well. So this was one of those coaching chess matches. Hinkley just happened to get it just right at the right time. I don't think Longmire did anything wrong. I just think that he can't control skill errors. He can't control brain fades. He can't control that type of stuff. This was one of those again, all due respect to Port Adelaide fans. Sydney lost this more than Port won it. Port won the game because they made the plays when they need to. But Sydney, if they hit some of the corridor kicks that they had to, they're going to win the game. Were there some dubious free kicks? Yes, there's dubious free kicks in every single game. As I tell many a Swans fan, and I don't complain about the umpires because I feel that it is a waste of time. If you play your game the way you want to and how you want to, the umpires should not make an impact to change the end of the game. So when the first thing that I see online is somebody going, "Well, the umpires lost us the game," I go, "You obviously were not paying attention to this game at all." Because the umpires are not the ones kicking the goals or kicking the behinds or kicking over somebody that's 17 meters away and you put 2 meters over his head or you put it on the ground or he's got to pick it up and now he's under pressure. So I'm gonna I some may say I'm too rosy glassed sometimes. No, plain and simply, Sydney was underperforming. Port did just what they needed to do after a week of absolute hell in South Australia because Hinkley was on fire. If they lose this game, I think Hinkley doesn't make it through halfway through the season. So that win kind of they put a few splashes of water on his hot seat. I don't think he's completely out of the woods, but he's definitely a little bit cooler than he was going into the SCG on Saturday night.
Absolutely. I think an away trip, and a win in an away trip certainly galvanizes the group. And as you said, Port just hung in there. They just hung in and hung in and hung in, which is what you need to do at the SCG, especially when the Swans get on a roll.
Mm-hmm.
And early in that third quarter, it looked like the Swans were about to burst away, even obviously without Tommy McCartan in that back line. And hopefully, all is okay with him in terms of his recovery, because in what looked like a very innocuous sort of hit, you could see the trouble he was in. And obviously, that's something that no supporter likes to see, regardless of if you're a Swan supporter or or just an AFL supporter. But yeah, Charlie Dixon moving into the ruck against Peter Laddams. Obviously, Dixon has a bit more pace on him and obviously a bit more size. A big, bulky man is Charlie. And Jeremy Finlayson with that mark with a minute to go. Obviously, a very big contested mark that he took. Dane Rampy was on him. And you think if either one of those McCartan boys is out there, Finlayson probably doesn't take that mark. The Swans
Mhm.
get the 4 points and the pressure's on Hinkley.
Yep. Completely agree. So it's a frustrating one for a Swans fan, but again, as I told a few of the port people that I know, I had a few of them reach out and say commiserations. They thought it was a great game, and I told them, I said, "Hey, your lot did what you needed to do. Plain and simply, I give you all the respect in the world. I'm one of those. I try to be as cordial and as friendly as I can to all supporters, just because I feel that we've all been through those. We've all been through those moments where your team loses one that you tear your hair out a little bit because you're like, why did we lose that? So it happens. And all thanks and respect to all of those, to all of my port supporting friends out there. I love you guys. You're awesome. Again, so much congratulations there. So we'll leave the we'll leave the SCG, come back down to Marvel, where Essendon, as you said as in your thoughts, 22 behind and still win 88-75 by 7. A fantastic game of footy, but it is the kind of GWS let one slip away that probably shouldn't have, and Essendon kept one that probably shouldn't have.
Yeah, it's. I think in terms of the Bombers, I read an interesting statistic that Jake Stringer had 10 score involvements, of which the 10 score involvements were 4 goals and 6 behinds. So there was no passing it off to anyone else to get them into the game. But yeah, GWS were very, very plucky. And then that third quarter, when the Bombers really started to put the press on them, it was really interesting watching Adam Kingsley at the 3/4 time huddle, because he absolutely unleashed on his team. And it can either have one of two effects: either they come out firing, or they seem flat. And up until probably about 5 minutes to go, the Bombers had really kicked clear before GWS kicked the last 2 goals to sort of get it back to just sort of that 2 goal margin. So be interesting to see. Obviously, a loss for the Giants is great because we play them this week for gather round. So hopefully we can do the same as the Bombers did.
It'll be very, very interesting. That'll be a fascinating that'll be a fascinating one for sure. So we jump out west, out to Optus Stadium. And this is for anybody in the AFL. This is not a good sign that the Demons may have found that right little group that they have to maybe get back to the prime chance of being a flag contender, as they smack down the West Coast Eagles 63 126 63 in a game that it's scary to think this is a no Max Gone led D's team, and they absolutely look incredibly difficult to beat if they are on. I mean, Petraka kicks 3. Oliver has a great game. Van Rooyen, the young rookie, seems to have just stepped into this thing and looks like an absolute legend. Tommy McDonald coming in. Ben Brown is not even on this team. Christian Salem is still not playing for this team. This is not even a full strength Melbourne Demons team, and they look really, really good. We could see the foil to Collingwood here in the D's. I mean, it's kind of scary to think that this D's team could get better, and we're only 4 rounds in.
Yeah, they certainly look fantastic. And you think no Max Gorn, but Brodie Grundy. What an astute pickup by them in the off season to bring him in. He looks absolutely amazing. Back to that form that he had when he was at the Pipes. And then, as you said, looking at Van Rooyen in the forward line, Tommy McDonald comes in, kicks goals, plays as that pseudo centre half forward, being able to push up onto the wing and then use his work rate to get back. And I think the one thing I actually loved seeing in the game, and obviously they lost by 60 odd points, but Adam Simpson has been forced to play the young kids at West Coast just to see what
Mhm.
they've got because of the injuries they have at the moment. And the effort was there. And that's one thing you cannot take away. And you think sometimes that youthful exuberance, you get those young kids in who are willing to have a go, and willing to put in that effort that I'm not saying that the older players don't, but when you've been to the top of the mountain, you've got your premiership. It's always hard to to go back and to keep putting in the same amount of effort when your team's down the bottom of the table. But yeah, looking at some of those young kids, I thought how wonderful was it to see them there. And I guess the one interesting thing was Elliot Yeo being played in the back line
Hmm.
because obviously he's great in terms of offensively, but defensively, the D's were able to pick him out. And I think that's where Tommy McDonald was able to exploit him big time.
Yeah, definitely for sure. And it'll be interesting to see how this goes because unfortunately, with the injury list that ran through that first, it really did kind of force Adam Simpson's hand. And the other thing too, not only the young kids, but he's starting to kind of get away from the kick mark, old school footy that kind of dominated for the long period of time. You started seeing West Coast play on a little bit more. They're using speed of ball a lot more. So seeing Adam Simpson kind of adjust to present day footy, I think it is also good too because it keeps the competition entertaining because I think many of us last year we kind of looked at West Coast and went, great, they're going to get smashed and they're going to play boring footy when they do have the ball. Like it was doubly painful to watch because you knew they'd get absolutely flogged. But they when they did have the ball, there was no attack to them at all. They just kind of kick mark. They really kind of slow the game down, almost like they were trying to play to keep the score close. So to see them taking risks, which again may lead to bigger scores, but at least they're trying. The kids are trying to do something. So all on you, Adam Simpson. Please don't revert back because I think you've got some talent and some skill that I think you're going to be able to progress this team a little bit quicker if you try to play present day style footy. And there's some talent. There is some talent on this Eagles roster, and maybe a few early picks I think may increase their chances of going up the ladder a little bit over the next couple of seasons for sure. So we already had my painful one. Unfortunately, Tim, I will let you take the lead on this. Unfortunately, you had your painful one as Geelong kind of clicks back into last year's Geelong as they win by 82, 127 to 45. And Jeremy Cameron kicks 7 goals and takes out an umpire in during his celebration. Thankfully, nobody was hurt, but oh boy. Thoughts, sir. I'm gonna let you take the lead on this one. What are your thoughts on this game? Because I mean, the Cats look good, and unfortunately, the Hawks are still trying to find their way.
Yeah, well, firstly, I hope Jeremy Cameron gets 5 weeks for that because running over that poor umpire, you know, kicking your seventh goal against an 18th ranked side, doesn't probably don't need that type of reaction. No, the up until half time, I was quite boyish in terms of the effort that Hawthorn brought,
Hmm.
but that third quarter, Geelong's midfield just clicked for the first time all year. It just clicked, and you can see by having the 6-6-6 rule, if you've got a forward line that contains your Jeremy Camerons, your Tyson Stengels, your Tom Hawkins, I think at times they had um, uh, young Maxi Holmes was there. You've got players of that caliber going through. And if you're 6-on-6, you're giving them lots of space and ability to be able to do it. And then for the first time all year, Geelong used the corridor. And everyone's been saying how slow they look, how slow they look, how slow they look. And yesterday, yeah, after halftime, they certainly weren't slow. And it was, yeah, scintillating to watch. And, as a Hawthorn supporter, it wasn't great to watch that third quarter. I think when a team piles on 65 points to zero in 20 odd minutes of game time, you start sitting there scratching your head. But I don't think there was much more that they could have done. I think the one issue we had was our rucks because Stanley is not a great tap ruckman at all. He's fantastic
Hmm.
around the ground because of his
Hmm.
athletic ability, same as Blitzarves. But in that third quarter, Ned Reeves, who at 211 centimeters is huge, and Lloyd Meek, they just weren't able to get their hands on the ball at the centre bounces. And when they did, it was going straight down the throat of Geelong players. So yeah, it wasn't a great watch, but I think there was some certain highlights for Hawthorn in that first half that we can
Hmm.
take away and bank. And the Geelong I saw in the third quarter is what I expected to see from the start of the game. So for us to be able to curtail that for half a game, yeah, certainly a positive to come from that.
Yeah, and was it Meek or Reeves who sold the foot candy and got it was Ollie Henry or somebody to go and totally absolutely put them on their tail before they went like another 5 steps and bombed it down the line. But I had to chuckle at that a little
Yeah,
bit.
no, that was
You,
yeah, big Lloyd Meek it was, and it was Gary Rowan who was on the mark, and
yeah,
they thought,
yep.
wow, how good's that? Because I think Gary Rowan only ever plays well against Hawthorn. I think that's how he gets his contracts. Because for the rest of the season, he doesn't seem to get a touch, but when he was at the Swans, he'd always play well against us. And then at the Cats, he does the same. But yeah, Lloyd did the sold a bit of foot candy, got the extra 5 meters, bombed it, and instead of kicking towards the boundary line, so if we didn't take the mark, it would go out. He kicked it about 35 meters in,
Hmm.
which was wonderful. I think it went straight to either Tom Stewart or Asava Radigalea,
Yeah, it was one
and
of
back
those
it
two.
and back it came.
It was like it was just fascinating. He's so and again, I think Gary Rowan sometimes his pace sometimes can also be one of his biggest weaknesses because he gets going so fast he can't slow down. So the fact that he sold him foot candy and just completely wiped out after it, kind of had to chuckle at that a little bit. But it's pretty ballsy. You're just outside your own goal and you're selling foot candy to a defender that's probably 3 times as fast as you are. So no, it was one of those where again that was the Cats team that on their day they're very very difficult to stop. There's very few defenses that are going to stop a team when Cameron's going. Hawkins looked a little bit better. I still think he's a little underdone. We'll have to see how that goes. And then when they can get their run and gun style. And Tommy Stewart is their linchpin. If he's on the ground, it does change games. I think the game against Gold Coast, he wasn't really allowed to change the game as much as he had in previous games. So this is a little bit more like the Geelong I think we all expect. Can they maintain it will be how that goes for sure. So, all righty, that is going to do it for all 9 games of round 4. Should we go to our normal burning questions? And this is going to be fun because as I kind of previewed a little bit earlier, one of our questions has been submitted by Ross, our producer, because he has a question for me. But that will be the next one. The first question of the burning questions, I ask you this, Tim, as we kind of said, gather round is this round. And conveniently, conveniently, Pies v Saints, two of the best teams in the league, are going to go at it in South Australia. For you, looking at this slate, is this not the game of the round for gather round that these two teams hook up right now?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating contest. It's also quite interesting that it is the Sunday twilight game, which means you have to watch 8 other games of Aussie rules before that game starts. But I reckon that there is going to be one. The other one that will be interesting will be the actual start to gather round. So I think the
I
two
agree.
games of the round are the start
The
and
bookends.
the end because yeah, you've got the Crows playing in Adelaide against the Blues, and it'll be interesting to see how the Crows young midfield holds up against the Carlton midfield with the likes of Chera and obviously Cripps going through there.
And I believe
And
Sam
then,
Walsh might be back for that too.
yeah, Walsh could be back as well. And then, yep, you have a look on that Sunday twilight game where you've got the run and gun style of the Pies up against St Kilda. And it'll be interesting to see whether Ross continues to play that free flowing attacking football or if we see some of the best from Ross the boss in terms of let's make it a
Cut it down.
34-33 win
Hmm.
and we'll be victors that way.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating for sure. I agree with you. I think that Crows Blues game is sneaky good at the start of it's at the start of it. But I think the Pies St. Kilda is the one everybody's looking forward to because how much energy the Pies had early, and then what a story that St. Kilda has been with their injury list and the scary thing to think, as you kind of said, Membry's not a guaranteed in, King's not a guaranteed in because of how well they're playing. Still to come back. They've got some darn good talent still to come back on this Saints team. Scary thing is they could get better with some of this improved talent. So it'd be fascinating to see how that goes. Completely agree with it. So right now, I'm going to throw it to Ross. Ross has a question for me. He wanted to be part of the podcast, so he decided to send this question to me. So, Ross, take it away.
O'Connor, that's a beautifully weighted kick.
Gentlemen, how's it going? Listeners, how's it going? I bet you haven't heard my voice for a while. It's Ross, the producer now. But I got a question for you. Donnie, there is no better person that I can ask this question to is our resident Swans. Let's throw out the term insider. All right, your resident Swans insider. There's been a lot of talk about this one guy throughout much of the league. Probably more talk coming outside of the Swans than the Swans themselves, but of course you can correct me on that one. But it concerns the great Buddy Franklin. Of course, we all know him as the elite of the elite of the elite. That's why his disposal rate over his career is elite. His kicks, elite. Marks inside 50, elite. Goals, elite. But so far this season, through 4 rounds, it's been not even close to elite. In fact, his disposals, below average. Kicks, average. Goals, average. Goal accuracy, way below his career average and the average of the rest of the comp. Marks, below average. Tackles, below average. Are we witnessing the real-time descent of the great Buddy Franklin? Or has it only been 4 rounds this early in the season and we're all just overacting way too much about this? Thank you guys. Donnie, keep killing it in everything you do. Fans, thank you so much for listening. And I hope you guys had a fantastic Easter. The King is risen. Have a great rest of the show, guys. Thanks for taking my question.
O'Connor, that's a beautifully weighted kick.
Thank you, Ross, for the question. Inconveniently, you have to ask it to me after a Sydney Swans loss. So the Swans fans are always so fascinating when they jump on to this. So, and Tim, I will let you answer this question just after me too, since you had the luxury of watching him during his prime with the Hawthorn Hawks. For me, is he at his peak of his powers? No. I will be 100% honest. He is not. He is not what he was even when he donned the Hawks Guernsey, which I think were some of his best years. I mean, you don't kick 100 goals and do some of the things that he did in the brown and gold. He just has never done that. I mean, it's father time. It's going to happen. As much as everybody wants to be that David Mundy that plays so many games and never seems to dissipate, it's going to happen. Is he as much of a negative impact on Sydney as some people say? No, I think he drags a top defender to him, which then lets a Logan McDonald and Armadi, a Papley have a 3rd or 4th defender, which I think lets them progress a little bit to where when Buddy does leave, I believe after this season, they'll be ready because they'll have got some confidence. They'll be stronger. They'll be a year older. So as much as everybody's like, well, Buddy's not kicking 3 goals a game, yada, yada, that's great. But what he's doing is letting the youngsters progress with a little bit easier matchups to give them confidence as they grow old. You don't want a Logan McDonald or Armadi getting the tough best defender because they will struggle a little bit as a younger player. So is he as good as he was? No. Is he still valuable to the Swans team, not just because of putting butts every 16 inches in the stands? Yes, because I think he still drags a top defender. He can still play, but he's just not that invincible 70-meter goal buddy that he used to be. He's still a very good goal kick. He's still a very wise head. He's got a great footy head on his mind. He is helping teach Armadi and Logan and Heaney and Papley the ropes. So then when he does step away, that knowledge gets to stay with the Swans. But Tim, I ask you this. I mean, am I too far off in saying this? The buddy that the Swans got was never going to be the buddy that the Hawks had.
Yeah, I think over time, obviously, time's going to make sure that what we saw at the Hawks and what we now see at the Swans is completely different. I mean, how often have you seen the Buddy Franklin who takes off 160 meters away from goal with 4 or 5 running bounces and slots it through from 50? It's hard to be able to do as a 23, 24, 25-year-old. And then you add an extra decade on, and you've now got a 35-year-old trying to do it, and it makes it incredibly difficult. And a parallel I'm seeing this season at the Swans is similar to Buddy when he left Hawthorn in 2013, where he isn't the focal point of that forward line anymore. He's fantastic to have. He's like that cherry on top, but he's no longer the big focal point because, as you said, you've got your Logan McDonalds and your Joel Amadis who, when Buddy does ride off into the sunset, more than likely at the end of this season, you have to have someone there ready to take over that role, because if you don't, then you start having massive issues in terms of your forward line. So I actually think at the present time, Buddy Franklin is being incredibly selfless in terms of the way that he's playing.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing, like I've said a few times, is that I watch Buddy pretty extensively because he's always been one of my favorite players. Even when he was with Hawthorn, he was always one of my favorite players. But the one thing I've noticed at Sydney is he is just as big a cheerleader for his teammates kicking goals as he is for himself. I can't tell you how many times he sees Logan get a mark, and the first person to Logan after he kicks the goal is Buddy Franklin. Or when he kicks it to Tommy Papley and Tommy Papley kicks a goal, he's the first person to give Tommy Papley a bear hug once Tommy Papley's done running around the oval with his tongue out, celebrating like a Muppet. But that's one of the things that I love about Tommy Papley is he can get under the skin of people, but he's such that little ball of energy that I absolutely love. Armani, so it's like he's such a great teammate. Like he doesn't make it all about himself. Yes, he gives the midfielders the stare of death when he doesn't get the ball. I mean, what full forward doesn't? But he's finding a way to try to make an impact when he can. Is he doing it every game? No. I mean, no player is going to be exactly the same every single game. They're human beings, they're not machines. As much as some people want them to be machines, they're not. So, I, did he stay one season too long? I'm not going to say that because we're 4 games in, as Ross kind of said at the end of the question. We're 4 games in. I think it's a little early to say that. I do think he's done after this season, whether they get a flag or not, just because I think the wear and tear on his body. He's had so many injuries there for about a 4-year span that I think he still goes out. He got his 1,000th goal. I think he got the ultimate accomplishment that he can. So again, love you, bud. Continue, have and enjoy this season. And I hope the Swans are able to get you as far as they possibly can. So we'll end the burning questions, but I have a Hawks fan, so I'll ask this. I know this was a tough loss this week, but are you one of those people that as you kind of look at it, what are you looking forward to as this season goes on? Like what are your kind of thoughts on how the season goes? Because again, as we kind of talked about off mic, is that you had to make some decisions that I think for the betterment of the club and the future, as much as it may seem like tanking, as some people would say, I don't think so. I just think you're setting your youngsters up to have that opportunity to learn via gameplay, not behind the Jaeger Ramirez, the Tom Mitchells, and the older experienced guys that honestly are not going to be there when you're contending for a flag in the future.
Yeah, so in terms of Jaeger and Tom, I go back to round 4 last year against St Kilda at the MCG, where both those guys played and we got absolutely spanked. I think the end result was somewhere around the 70 or 80 point margin. And on that day, they clearly weren't showing that leadership and all the rest of it that everyone's, raving on about that they'd be able to show this year for us. And I think the thing I'm looking forward to seeing is just the continual growth of some of those young kids coming through. Obviously, we've got Connor McDonald, Josh Ward from last season who are in their second season. And, it's always difficult in your second year of Aussie rules. They always talk about the second year blues. So it'll be interesting to see how they perform for the rest of the season. We've got young Cam McKenzie, young Frenchie who's come in, played all 4 games so far. Josh Weddle, who was named on the bench on the weekend and then got injured in the last training session on Friday. And I have a sneaking suspicion that he was going to play, which would have been fascinating, obviously, to give another young kid a go. And then we've got the likes of Henry Huswaite, Ned Long, who in the VFL on the weekend looked like an absolute beast, and the kid hasn't even turned 20 yet. Max Lynch has been knocking on the door down at VFL level. So it's actually quite a lot of positives in terms of Hawthorn because we've got a lot of depth. We don't have a lot of experience, but we have a ton of depth. And it'll be interesting to see how Sam Mitchell moves the magnets around. And then round 7 is when Mitch Lewis looks like he'll be back if everything goes well. Touch wood. So I think every single Hawthorn supporter is touching every single piece of wood they walk past at all times just to make sure that he's back. But I think having a bit of a presence in the forward line where we've got a target to kick to will be great. So it's not all doom and gloom. I think I've been known as probably the most optimistic Hawthorn supporter of all time, and none of that's changed, even though we've had two beltings at the MCG. And ironically, both those beltings have come when they've had celebrations. So the first game was the 40-year reunion from the 1983 Premiership team. And on Easter Monday, we had the 2008 15-year reunion from when they knocked off Geelong in the grand final. So
Mhm.
hopefully there's no more reunions to go this year because we might be a bit more competitive at the MCG.
Oh boy, that's one of those you're like no no not this year not this year. You gotta hey you gotta find something to laugh at or make you cry sometimes. But hey, I love that and I agree. I love optimistic fans that they don't just doom and gloom it because I think sometimes the doom and gloom gets rather too prevalent sometimes in sport talk for sure. So and again, I've always respected Hawthorn. I think they've always went about it in a way that's classy and respectful, and I've always enjoyed it. I know Sydney and Hawthorn had that about 5 or 6 years where it was like they always seemed to play tough competitive games where it would come down to a kick after the siren or a kick late, and so it was always so much fun for me. And I, again, always respected Hawthorn. So I hope that the change comes quickly for you guys because it's always good in the competition when Hawthorn is playing well. So we go from that to I didn't really explain this to you, Hughes, but I do a team of the week every year, team of the week every round, just to kind of give a shout out to some of these players that I think have had some great performances. Now, my metric is a little bit different than some people. I don't just go, he's got 30 disposals, he's in. No, I tend to do scoreboard impact, goals, behinds, because I think making an impact in the game on the scoreboard, I think is some of the best things. So there may be some names that are going to kind of be in a little bit odd place, or maybe that you maybe won't think. So I want to hear what you think about this. So we'll start off. I always start on the defense because as a coach, you always start with the defense because that's your bread and butter. So starting in the defense, it's hard not to start out. Collingwood's Nick Dacos. I mean, he plays that halfback role. Yes, he goes in the midfield, but majority halfback. Absolutely fantastic. Kicks 2 goals. The young kid is absolutely fantastic. And as we were saying off mic, Brownlow medal could be in his future very, very soon if he continues to play this well. And another gentleman who I think is having a ripping season and could be a very good chance of winning the Rising Star is North Harry Sheasel. Another fantastic game for that young man. Adelaide's Jordan Dawson. I know he's been going into the midfield more, but he's still technically classified as a defender. He usually starts there, so I usually give him the benefit of the doubt. The Western Bulldogs, Caleb Daniel. Again, when you're a forward and a minuscule one when it comes to height wise, when you can go and kick goals, I got to give you a little bit of credit. Sydney, I know he's taken a little bit of flack for his celebrating when he didn't kick the goal, and that's Ollie Florent from the Sydney Swans. He did kick a goal earlier in the game. He had a career high in disposals with 33. Fantastic game by Oflo there. I wish he would have had two, but unfortunately, you don't always get your way. And Essendon's Mason Redmond also kicking a goal for the Bombers. Not thankfully, not one of the 22 behinds. We jump into the ruck, and as I said during our discussion of that game, Western Bulldogs Tim English. I think he's playing fantastic. He kicks 2 goals in this game. His ruck craft is getting better and better each year. He's a deadly, deadly player for that very good midfield of the Doggies, and he's one of the reasons why. We jump to the midfield, also from the Western Bulldogs, Tom Liberatore. Again, you kick 2 goals as a midfielder. I got to give you a little bit of credit. Sydney's Chad Warner, another fantastic game with 30 disposals and 2 goals in this game. Just fell a little bit short for Sydney, but another great, fantastic performance by him. GWS's Josh Kelly kicks 2 goals for the Giants in a game where they just fall a little bit short to the Essendon Bombers. West Coast Tim Kelly. You as a midfielder for West Coast kicked 2 goals against a very good Melbourne defensive team in the Melbourne Demons. I got to give you a little bit of credit. And then kicking 3 goals over the weekend, the best midfielding production is Christian Petraka of the Melbourne Demons. We go to the forward line, and this is all about goals. The guys that have kicked the most goals are the ones that are getting the love here. Brisbane's Camarena, Brisbane's Charlie Cameron, Carlton's Charlie Curnow, St. Kilda's Jack Higgins, Melbourne's Tommy McDonald, and Geelong's Jeremy Cameron round out the starters. On the bench, I do one defender, one ruckman, one midfielder, one forward, just to spread the love around. Defender, Geelong's Mitch Duncan coming back from an injury, and I think he had like 30 or 31 disposals in this game. Had quite an impact for the Cats. Essendon's Sam Draper, again, another ruckman kicking goals. Doesn't happen very often, so I got to give you a little bit of love. Midfielder, we kind of discussed him with Adelaide, as Adelaide's Jake Saligo. And last but not least, the forward, 4 goals, 6 behinds for the package. Jake Stringer rounds out my bench. So an interesting group, a very fascinating one. So just really quickly, I know it's not always easy, but kind of thoughts about that. Like I said, goal impact, goals behinds tend to be things that I tend to tip you a little bit higher on my chances of making the team. So thoughts on the team of the week?
Yeah, I think you've nailed it in terms of some of those players. Obviously, Jordan Dawson in that back line, as you said, he has been playing a bit of time through the midfield, but he also is able to go into that half back line. Harry Sheasel is one that makes Hawthorn supporters cry, because he is a passionate, well,
Hawthorne
was,
supporter.
sorry, I say is, but was, because now that he wears the North Melbourne colours, mind you, hopefully 3 or 4 years into his time at North Melbourne, he'll see the light and ask for a trade back to Hawthorn. So we'll take him then. Uh, Timmy English in the ruck, yeah, he's looking phenomenal, isn't he, at the moment? I think the two top ruckmen in the competition at the present time would be Tim English, and then over the weekend we saw the work of Brodie Grundy. So I think
Hmm.
those two are going to be fighting tooth and nail in terms of that spot. And then, as you said, Jake Stringer. If you have 10 score involvements, of which you have 10 shots on goal, and you kick 4 goals, six, imagine if he kicked 6-4 or 7-3 or 8-2. And you think about it, and it's interesting because David King on AFL 360 was talking about which player, if you were playing today, would you want to be? And he said Jake Stringer, because when he comes back, he just looks like he's had a good time in his off season,
Hmm.
and he doesn't always look the most professional in terms of the way that he comes back from preseason before training starts and all the rest of it. But he's certainly a bit of a barometer for that team. And it'd be fascinating to see if he's out of contract, because Jake Stringer always seems to play well the year that he's out of contract. So
Hmm.
maybe he's hoping to get a bit of a contract extension, having 10 shots on goal on the weekend.
Yeah, he's one of those. I remember David King. I heard David King say that, but he's one of those. He's that X factor guy. He's that guy. He's not going to get a ton of touches, but when he does get a touch, he makes something happen. Like that's the most interesting thing about him. Like he could get 10 touches, and his 10 touches, he kicks six. He kicks 6 goals. So that's just kind of the way he is, and he can go into the midfield when he's got a good conditioning block underneath him, and he can be that impact midfielder that he finds the footy, he gets it to the guy he needs to, and then he makes an impact. So he's one of those, as much of an enigma as he is for many footy fans, he's one of those guys that you want him to get the footy because something happens. So that's one of those. I've always enjoyed him because not only is he a character, as you kind of said with his off season, but he's just one of those. He gets footy in hand, and something's going to happen. Something interesting is going to happen, whether good, whether bad. It is something interesting is going to happen when the package gets the footy in hand. So that's done with team of the week. We jump to it. Tips. We are going to tip gather round all 9 games in South Australia, and all of my South Australian friends that I know of are super, super excited to have all the teams in Adelaide and in the Adelaide area. I cannot wait. Let's go through it, Tim. I know this hasn't been easy. Tipping has been a nightmare for many, but I got to say, I actually had a good week. I was 7-2 this last round. So unfortunately, Sydney and Collingwood nipped me. so I gotta say I was not too bad in the tipping, but it was another one of those, as I say to a few, it's like whenever I tip Sydney, I always miss that tip because they always, and when I tip against them, that's when I get it right. I'm just like, oh geez, really? So so let's jump into it. The tips, as we said, the bookend games are going to be the most fascinating. We'll start with a good one. Adelaide v Carlton, Adelaide Oval, Thursday night footy. Who do you got in this one?
I'm going the Crows. I think they will knock off the Blues and give the Blues their first loss for the season. Obviously, they had the draw, but I think Adelaide at home, gather round, they'll be up and about. Isaac Rankin, Josh Rochelle. How do you stop those two? And then Tex Walker seems to be in some good form. So it'll be a fascinating game, but I reckon the Crows, who are outsiders in terms of the betting market, can get the chocolates.
I'm one of those. I so want to tip Carlton so bad because like they've played good footy. If you look at, like I said, Sammy Walsh could potentially be back. They've got those bulls in the midfield with Crippa and then if Pitnet plays, I mean, I think they've got it. And Riley O'Brien's been kind of inconsistent, but I think I'm going to go with you on this. I think you're on the right track. I think at home, a ton of energy. It's a Thursday night. Carlton, I think, had a little bit more of a test against North Melbourne. I think they go into this game a little bit overconfident, a little bit. There's this weird overconfidence in the Carleton fan base that I kind of gauge that I think may rub off on their players a little bit. So I'm with you. I'm going to go Adelaide, but I think this is fourth quarter close. I think this is one that's going to come down to it. I think a Tex Walker goal late in the game, I think is one of those things that flips this. So the Enigma Cup in the Adelaide in the gather round as Fremantle face the Gold Coast at Norwood Oval. I'm going to tip Fremantle, but this is literally one I could flip a coin and I'd be just as accurate because I don't know what teams are going to show up. I mean, if it's the Fremantle team that showed up against the West Coast Eagles, I think Fremantle wins it 9 out of 10 times. But if it's the Gold Coast team that showed up against Geelong, I think Gold Coast has got a super good chance of winning this game. So I'm going to tip Fremantle against my better judgment just because Gold Coast is much more the Jekyll and Hyde team because I still don't 100% know what Fremantle is. So your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I am. I'm going to be putting my eggs in the basket of Gold Coast. I think in terms of Gold Coast, I think this week we'll see Jack Lukosius up and about. I think we'll see the King brother getting a bit of the ball, and Matt Rowell, he'll be making amends for his 12 touches against St Kilda. So I think Gold Coast will come out firing. I think they will probably just have a bit too much firepower for Fremantle, which means Fremantle are then sitting perilously close to missing out on the 8.
Mm-hmm. We go to the Friday night footy game, sees the Richmond Tigers and the Sydney Swans at Adelaide Oval. Richmond with some injury issues as Jack Graham, Toby Nankervis could potentially be out with a syndesmosis of an ankle, and the broken foot by Lynch sees three probably new additions into the lineup. Who do you see in this one?
I think the Swans. Obviously, the McCartan brothers are a watch and see. Obviously, we know Tommy probably won't be. Sorry, Paddy won't be playing. Hopefully, Tom will be up for that. But yeah, I
If
think
he's out by concussion, I think they're both out, and
they're both
that's
out.
yep.
Both yes,
They were
both.
both
Yeah,
out
there
via
we go.
concussion, so
Yeah,
they're
so
both out. Mm-hmm.
both out. So it'll be interesting to see what happens then in terms of defense for the Swans. Obviously, you'll have Dane Rampy at the back. I'm not sure who else will go back. Maybe, yeah, that will be interesting to see. But I think Richmond having no Tom Lynch certainly nullifies that part. But yeah, I think the Swans will get the win over Richmond, which, for Richmond supporters, they probably won't enjoy seeing their team down the bottom. But it happens to the best of sides.
I look at this and I'll give you a little give you a little bit of insight on this a little bit is that I'm going to tip Sydney just because I think Jack Graham's loss is actually bigger than Lynch's because he's a linchpin between their midfield and their forward line, and him being out. Nankervis is also a big one because he's really good for an underrated ruckman. He surprisingly, and the funny thing is he's a former Swans ruckman, which I chuckle a little bit that two of the better ruckmen in the competition over the last couple of years have been Darcy Cameron and Toby Nankervis, and both were former Swans players. So I got the fact that, but then the joke, if you ask most Swans fans, is we got Tom Hickey, eventually got Tom Hickey, and look what he did for the 2 years that he's been with us. So no, the name that I think a lot of people are going to get introduced to this week will be one that's been on a lot of Swans fans' lips, and that is Will Gould. Yeah, a relatively good draft pick that we had gotten, but for some weird reason, he's never made his debut. Many a Swans fan have been wanting to see this young man. He's a distributing kind of really good middle-sized defender, really good kick, really good decision maker, but he's been stuck in the VFL because of guys like Tommy McCartan and then Paddy McCartan signing. And then I think Robbie Fox goes from the sub to the other person. He'll replace Paddy. And then I think Will Gould will replace Tommy McCartan. I think you'll probably, if Rewold is back, you'll probably see Rampy take him, and then we'll have to see how the matchups go. But I think Will Gould will make his debut unless they try to go with experience, and Aaron Francis, who they got in the offseason, would be those Will Gould, Aaron Francis, I think are the two that that most Swans fan look at. They will be the other replacement besides Robbie Fox. So I agree with you. I think Swans win it. I think their forward line is going to give Richmond issues. Grimes can only take one of the three-headed monster that is McDonald, Armadi, and Franklin, and whichever one doesn't, I think could have a field day, especially Armani and Logan McDonald. I think could have a good day against that defense since it's relatively undersized. So I think Swans win it, but Richmond keeps it close. They're not going to just roll over. Last year was a classic last year, but I think Sydney just a little too good for that one. So I think this is going to be a fascinating one. The next one also at the Adelaide Oval. Actually, no, it's Adelaide Hills. Brisbane Lions v the North Melbourne Roos. I'm going to tip Brisbane on this one. I think Brisbane is just a little too good, but North is going to make Brisbane earn it. And sometimes I say this, when you get a massive win, like a Collingwood win, you're susceptible the next week to an underperformance. Keep it. This is my keep an eye on one. Upset potential here. I'm going to tip Brisbane, but this is my keep an eye on upset potential. North Melbourne, keep an eye on them. They could nip the Lions this weekend. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm thinking the Lions will get the win here, based on how they played against the Swans. They just looked absolutely tremendous. So while it'd be nice to see North Melbourne be able to put up a bit of a spirited fight, which we know will happen, I think the Lions' firepower, if Cam Rayner shows up, if we see the Eric Hipwood, the Charlie Cameron, Joe Danaher, Josh Dunkley forward line that we know they possess, I don't think that North Melbourne has the firepower down back to be able to combat that. So I think the Lions will get the win here.
Alrighty, we jump to it back at the Adelaide Oval as Essendon take on the D's. I'm fascinated to see how Coach Scott handles this because this is a monster team coming in. Who do you got in this one?
Yeah, I think the D's get the win. Essendon have looked good in patches. I mean, obviously they look good round one against us. Against St Kilda, obviously St Kilda were able to make them look a bit second rate. And then on the weekend, GWS, very plucky against them. And I think if you look at the GWS team and you compare it to that Melbourne team, there's a big difference. And I think the Melbourne team will be able to get on top, especially considering Essendon don't have that real big defender down back. I think Zerk Thatcher is their tallest defender. So in terms of that, it's going to be a very interesting proposition for them to be able to stop that Melbourne forward line.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see. I got the D's as well. I think too good, too strong, but Essendon will give it a crack. I'll be fascinated to see how that goes. So, also at the Adelaide Oval, as Port Adelaide return home from the victory against the Sydney Swans to take on the Western Bulldogs. I don't know. I think this gives them a jump. I think I'm going to tip the Power in this one. I like the Duggies. I worried that the Keith injury after the whole incident with him and Lynch is going to mess with their defensive core. Yes, you've got Liam Jones, but Keith is one of those guys that you like having in the backline, especially when you have a Marshall, you have a Dixon in that forward line. So I think Port gets up in this one. Who do you got?
Yeah, I think Port at home too are a different proposition. They play at the Adelaide Oval very, very well. They'll have the crowd support behind them. Obviously, the Dogs look great. Libba was back to his best. You had the Bont looking fantastic as well, but no Alex Keith. And then what's the forward line of the Western Bulldogs going to look like? Because the first couple of weeks they didn't look great. Then Jamara came out and kicked 4, made it look like it was going to be fantastic. And then obviously the wet weather conditions on Saturday afternoon didn't quite help in terms of goal scoring. But yeah, I think Port Adelaide will get the win in this one.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see how they do it because if they try to go with that tall lineup, and then how does Port Adelaide handle it? They've got some talls. I mean, they've got Jonas and they've got Lear, but if they go with 3 talls, who guards that third tall and what's the matchups there? It'll be fascinating. So I'm not going to waste a lot of breath on this next one. Geelong v West Coast. I think this is Geelong and this is Geelong big. Any disagreement?
Look, I think West Coast will put up a bit of a fight, similar to what Hawthorn did. I think they'll put up a fight for the probably first half, similar to what we did. And I think, and then after that, Geelong will kick clear and get the victory.
Yeah, for sure. We jump to it. All right, we get to test your head versus heart tip on this one. GWS v Hawthorn at Norwood Oval. Do you tip in your Hawks or is GWS going to get your tip on this one?
No, you can't tip against your side. So we're tipping tipping the Hawks, and I think if we see the Hawthorn team that showed up for the first half against Geelong, I think they'll give it a real shake. We seem to play really well in Adelaide for some reason. Now, obviously, Norwood Oval is a different proposition in that.
Mm-hmm.
But Hawthorn seems to have a bit of a fan base in Adelaide. GWS don't seem to have a fan base anywhere they go. So hopefully the fans will be able to get Hawthorn over the line.
It'll be interesting. I'm fascinated. Again, GWS is another one of those where it's like there's days they look really good, and then there's days they look like so bad. So I just they seem to kind of one game off, one game on, one game off, one game on. I'm the fact that this is at Norwood, the fact that this is the Norwood Oval, like if this was at the MCG, I'd probably tip Hawthorn because it's on the road for both of them in a smaller venue. I'm gonna, I'm sorry, Dim. I'm gonna tip GWS. I think Toby Green sometimes can be a pain, but I don't know. I've bounced back and forth. I think I've bounced back and forth in this tip a couple of times this week because I see guys like CJ and Will Day playing really, really well. And if they have good days, they could frustrate this GWS team because they're super talented, but they get easily frustrated at times. I'm going to tip GWS, but this is another one. Keep an eye. I think Hawthorn, this is a really good shot to get 4 points for them because if they catch GWS at the right time, they can make them pay for it. So, last but not least, ninth game of Gather Round, the coup d'etat, the main event, Collingwood, the St. Kilda, Adelaide Oval. Who do you got?
The Saints. I think there's a reason that they're 4-0. And yeah, I think Collingwood on the weekend, we saw some chinks in the armour. Still no ruckman as such. And Rowan Marshall is a very good ruckman. So I think Rowan Marshall will be able to help St Kilda get first hands on the ball. And it'll be a very interesting game to watch. But I reckon the Saints will get the win in that one, which will make all those Collingwood supporters, I guess, a bit more nervous that their game plan and what they're doing might have been found out.
Okay, I'm not the only one. I legitimately I tipped the Saints. I'm with you. And almost basically verbatim what you just said was exactly what I was going to say. I saw some chinks in the armor. I don't think they're as effective kicking on goal. And if you're structurally sound and make them kick from the pockets and not get their marking inside kind of the corridor-ish type of 30 meters and in, Collingwood starts to struggle accuracy wise. St. Kilda's effort, their execution, and their structure under Ross Lyon, I think will help them because of the chaos game that is Collingwood. That I just see the Saints. I'm on the Saints train. I love what I'm seeing. I just think everything is going well. Is there doubt creeping into Collingwood after that loss because they had been being talked about in those first 3 rounds as being almost unbeatable? They're so good. Who's going to be able to stay with them? They're just going to outscore everybody. And for Brisbane to do what they did last week, I think really could put some doubt into it. But this is the one that's going to be the most fascinating because you have an undermanned Saints team that just never gives up, just keeps going. Could Collingwood be the team that breaks in this one instead of the other way around, where the team that plays Collingwood breaks from their constant pressure? So I'm with you. I'm not the only one. Thank you. I'm not the only one. I tip the Saints in this one. I know Pies fans, please don't be angry with me. This is nothing personal. There's something about the Saints team that I like, and I just think they have a little bit of the mental edge over Collingwood going forward. So that is going to do it for our episode. Tim, this has been a fantastic conversation. It's such a blast talking with you about Hawthorn earlier in the year and to be able to talk footy with you. It's been fantastic. But the other reason that I love it is that you are part of a women's Hawthorn podcast, the soaring. I'm totally brain farting on the name of the podcast. Can you tell us just tell me a little bit about that, and then how excited are you? I know this is an AFL podcast, but I'm going to let you give this. How excited are you for Greta Bodie and Emily Bates to join the brown and gold this season?
Yeah, that'll be fantastic additions. And then we also got Matea Breed and Chrissy Stratton as well in the mature age draft that just took place. So Chrissy Stratton has been in the competition before. I think she played at Collingwood. She's now playing her trade in the VFLW for Hawthorn, which is for Box Hill, sorry, which is great because Hawthorn and Box Hill have that affiliation. Working really well together. And then Matea Breed is a small forward who will add to that forward line with Greta Bodie as well. And then we've also got the likes of Sarah Perkins, we'll have Anya McDonough, Bridie Hipwell, as well as Sophie Locke. So, very, very excited for the season to come around. At the moment, the Box Hill Hawks are sitting on top of the VFLW ladder, which is great. So they've had 1 draw and 2 wins, and yesterday they knocked off the Southern Saints, which is St Kilda's team. And I think we knocked them off by close to 30 points. So sitting on top of the ladder, which is nice. And the podcast is called Soaring to New Heights. So myself and Liam, we obviously do some podcast work there. Last night, Liam interviewed Nicole Garner, who's the VFLW captain. So that'll be coming out later on this afternoon in terms of that podcast. So yeah, very excited for the women's podcast. And then I'm also on a podcast for the AFL team as well, which is called the Talking Hawks podcast, where we've had some players come on recently, which has been wonderful, getting a bit of insight into Sam Mitchell as a coach and what he's like behind the 4 walls.
Yeah, I've been keeping an eye on that podcast. It's absolutely fantastic. I love your guys' work, and I can't wait to be able to chat more, and especially coming into this women's season. I know both your Hawks, and then again with me with the Swans, there's a lot of positivity coming out of both clubs, because I think the off season has been good too. I think both of ours, because we went in last season a little bit shorter preseason and everything like that. So I don't think we had as much ability to bring in the players that we wanted to. So I'm very fascinated, but that is going to do it for our podcast. Thank you so much for joining in. That's another episode of Donnie's Disposals. Keep an eye out. We have more state league coverage coming up. Remember, I'm doing VFL, Sandful, and Waffle reviews this year, covering as much as I can when it comes to the footy. So we will talk again soon. And that has been another episode of Donnie's Disposals. We will see you again very soon.